Hello, and thank you for clicking onto my channel today. Today, at the time of recording, it is December 24th, Christmas Eve. Now, today it is rather cold. I live in Alabama, and our winters tend to be kind of mild, 40-ish, 50-ish usually, into 30s. Occasionally, we might get snow once a year, and it might actually stick. Today is 17 degrees outside. It was 9 degrees when I woke up this morning. This is not typical southern weather. Wow. Anyway, that's enough of that. In prepping for today, actually I had in mind to record A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Now, this was published in 1843, and I think pretty much everybody knows the story by now. It's become a part of Christmas culture, and the story of a miser who he treats everyone horribly. He doesn't see the point in Christmas. He doesn't see the point in being nice to other people. Period. And he is given an awakening by three spirits: the ghost of Christmas past, who shows him where he started and where he started to go wrong. The ghost of Christmas present, which shows him the whole wide world and how Christmas is a part of their lives and how joyful they become, except when they mention him. And then, of course, the ghost of Christmas future that shows them that, well, we all die, but how are you remembered when you go? And how is he remembered? As someone they're glad to see dead. He sees the impact of his life on other people. And of course, this changes who he is, and for the better. And this is a story it doesn't have to be Christmas time to read this story. I read it multiple times when I was in 7th grade, just because it happened to be in our literature book. And I probably read it several times during the course of that year. And I love this story. And I had this wonderful plan that I would sit and record on audio the whole thing. Or if not the whole thing, then to take the performance copy that Dickens would use when he would give live performances of A Christmas Carol. And it's the same edition or the same revisions that Patrick Stewart would use when he would do live performances of A Christmas Carol. And I had this great idea, and I started on it, and I recorded parts 1 and 2, and I'd get tongue-tied, and I'd stop, and I'd pick up wherever I left off. And I think I got stave 1 in 5 tries. I got stave 2 in 5 tries. Then I got to part 3. We're up to 12 parts, and I'm not even halfway through it yet. And I looked at that and went, there's no way I'll have it done in time. No way to have it edited in time. So I kind of put that on the back burner. But I decided, yes, I am still going to do A Christmas Carol for Christmas Eve. And so what I've done is I have recorded a few scenes from it. And scenes I thought were just really good, and they stood out in my mind. And at least one of them was not in the revised copy that Dickens would use when he would perform it. And this particular scene is Scrooge is at Bob Cratchit's home, and he is seeing the family, and they're enjoying Christmas and being there with each other. And he sees Tiny Tim, and his heart starts working for a little bit, and he asks if Tiny Tim will die. And the spirit's response is a rebuke of some of the things that Scrooge has said earlier. There's that great scene in part 1 where the portly gentlemen come to Scrooge and ask if he'd like to donate to the fund, and he says, no, I pay for workhouses, I pay for prisons. If they're bad enough off, they should go there. And the response is, many cannot, and many would rather die. Then if they would prefer to die, then they should do it and decrease the surplus population. There is a very stern rebuke. Another scene, which I did not record, but it's not in the revision that he would perform, is when Marley first appears. And we know he has that long chain behind him that's covered in cash boxes and safes and all these other things that represent his dedication to money. And Scrooge asks him, "What is this?" And Marley tells him, "This is the chain I forged in life. I girded it about myself, made link by link." And then he proceeds to tell Scrooge that 7 years ago, Scrooge's own chain was just as long, and he has labored on it since. So anyway, those are just some of the, a couple of the scenes, and I didn't re-record that one for this. But anyway, a selection of scenes from A Christmas Carol. I hope you enjoy them, and I hope you have a wonderful Christmas tomorrow. And again, from my perspective, it's December 24th, and Lord willing, this will be up by midnight tonight, so it will be ready for people to view on Christmas Day. So, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and here it is, A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens.
Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Mind, I don't mean to say that I know of my own knowledge what there is particularly dead about a doornail. I might have been inclined myself to regard a coffin nail as the deadest piece of ironmongery in the trade, but the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simile, and my unhallowed hand shall not disturb it, or the country's done for. You will therefore permit me to repeat emphatically that Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead? Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee, his sole friend and sole mourner. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event, but that he was an excellent man of business on the very day of the funeral, and solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name, however. There it yet stood, years afterwards, above the warehouse door. Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge, and sometimes Marley. He answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone with Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. The external heat and cold had little influence on him. No warmth could warm, no cold could chill him. No wind that blew was bitterer than he. No falling snow was more intent upon its purpose. No pelting rain less open to entreaty. Foul weather didn't know where to have him. The heaviest rain and snow and hail and sleet could boast of the advantage over him in only one respect. They often came down handsomely. And Scrooge never did. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say with gladsome looks, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what it was o'clock. No man or woman ever once in all his life inquired the way to such and such a place of Scrooge. Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming on, would turn their owners into doorways and up courts, and then would wag their tails as though they said, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye, dark master." But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance, was what the knowing ones call nuts to Scrooge. Once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, upon Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, bleak, biting, foggy weather, and the city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you! Cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation Scrooge had of his approach. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug!" "Christmas! A humbug, Uncle? You don't mean that, I am sure." "I do. Out upon Merry Christmas! What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older and not an hour richer. A time for balancing your books and having every item in them through a round dozen months presented dead against you. If I had my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should. Uncle, nephew, keep Christmas in your own way and let me keep it in mine. Keep it, but you don't keep it. Let me leave it alone, then. Much good may it do you. Much good has it ever done you. There are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say, Christmas among the rest. But I am sure I have always thought of Christmas time when it has come round, apart from veneration due its sacred origin, if anything belonging to it, called be apart from that, as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time, the only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely, and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow travelers to the grave, and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good, and will do me good. And I say, God bless it. The clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded. Let me hear another sound from you, said Scrooge, and you'll keep your Christmas Day by losing your situation. You're quite a powerful speaker, sir, he added, turning to his nephew. I wonder you don't go into Parliament. Don't be angry, Uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow. Scrooge said that he would see him. Yes, indeed he did. He went the whole length of the expression and said that he would see him in that extremity first. But why? Cried Scrooge's nephew. Why? Why did you get married? Because I fell in love. Because you fell in love, growled Scrooge, as if that were the only thing in the world more ridiculous than a Merry Christmas. Good afternoon. Nay, Uncle, but you would never have come to see me before that happened. Why give it as a reason for not coming now? Good afternoon. I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends? Good afternoon. I am sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute. We have never had any quarrel to which I have been a party, but I have made the trial in homage of Christmas, and I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last. So a Merry Christmas, Uncle. Good afternoon. And a Happy New Year. Good afternoon. At last the dinner was all done, the cloth was cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up. The compound in the jug tasted and considered perfect. Apples and oranges were put upon the table, and a shovelful of chestnuts on the fire. Then all the Cratchit family drew round the hearth in what Bob Cratchit called the circle, meaning half a one. And at Bob Cratchit's elbow stood the family display of glass, 2 tumblers and a custard cup without a handle. These held the hot stuff from the jug, however, as well as golden goblets would have done, and Bob served it out with beaming looks, while the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and cracked noisily. Then Bob proposed, "A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us," which all the family re-echoed. "God bless us, every one," said Tiny Tim, the last of all. He sat very close to his father's side upon his little stool. Bob held his withered little hand in his, as if he loved the child and wished to keep him by his side and dreaded that he might be taken from him. "Spirit," said Scrooge, with an interest he had never felt before, "tell me if Tiny Tim will live." "I see a vacant seat," replied the ghost. "In the poor chimney corner, a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die." "No," said Scrooge. "Oh, no, kind spirit, say he will be spared." "If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, none other of my race," returned the ghost, "will find him here." "What then?" "If he be like to die, he had better do it and decrease the surplus population." Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the spirit, and was overcome with penitence and grief. "Man," said the ghost, "if man you be in your heart, not adamant, forbear that wicked cant until you have discovered what the surplus is and where it is. Will you decide what men shall live, what men shall die? It may be that in the sight of heaven you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor man's child. Oh, God! To hear the insect on the leaf pronouncing only too much life among his hungry brothers in the dust." Scrooge bent before the ghost's rebuke, and trembling cast his eyes upon the ground, but he raised them speedily upon hearing his own name. "Mr. Scrooge," said Bob, "I'll give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast." "The founder of the feast, indeed!" cried Mrs. Cratchit, reddening. "I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon. I hope he'd have a good appetite for it." "My dear," said Bob, "the children. Christmas Day." "It should be Christmas Day, I am sure," said she, "on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you do, poor fellow." "My dear," was Bob's mild answer, "Christmas Day." "I'll drink his health for your sake and the day's," said Mrs. Cratchit. "Not for his. Long life to him, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very happy, I have no doubt." The children drank the toast after her. It was the first of their proceedings which had no heartiness. Tiny Tim drank it last of all, but he didn't care twopence for it. Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party, which was not dispelled for a full 5 minutes. But he was early at the office the next morning. Oh, he was early there. If he could only be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late, that was the thing he set his heart upon. And he did it. The clock struck 9. No Bob. 1:15. No Bob. Bob was full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Scrooge sat with his door wide open that he might see him coming to the tank. Bob's hat was off before he opened the door, his comforter too. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock. "Hello!" growled Scrooge in his accustomed voice, as near as he could feign it. "What do you mean by coming here at this time of day?" I am very sorry, sir. I am behind my time." "You are?" "Yes, I think you are. Step this way, if you please." It's only once a year, sir. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir. Now, I'll tell you what, my friend. I am not going to stand this sort of thing any longer. And therefore, Scrooge continued, leaping from his stool, giving Bob such a dig in the waistcoat that he staggered back into the tank again, and therefore I am about to raise your salary. Bob trembled and got a little nearer to the ruler. A Merry Christmas, Bob, said Scrooge, with an earnestness that could not be mistaken, as he clapped him on the back. A merrier Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, than I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family, and we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop, Bob. Make up the fires and buy a second coal sculler before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit. Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh and little heeded them, for he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happened on this globe for good at which some people did not have their fill of laughter in the outset. And knowing that such as these would be blind anyway, he thought it quite as well that they should wrinkle up their eyes and grins as have the malady in less attractive forms. His own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. He had no further intercourse with spirits, but lived upon the total abstinence principle ever afterwards, and it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that be truly said of us, and all of us, and so as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone.